Just looking for my slide. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to begin by thanking Martin and Cheryl and the UFO Research Queensland Committee for making this trip possible. I was most impressed at Customs and Immigration in Perth by the very efficient security, which is, I wish I could say for my own country, we have all manner of aliens, Somalian warlords, the whole lot. But I'm very impressed by security in Australia, I have to say. Although they did let me in. Just like this. My voice box turned up, or I don't know. Is there a level on the controller? How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Not quite.
No.
Not quite. Okay. Anyway, is that better or still a bit muffled? It's okay, is it? Okay. I'm always asked how I became interested in UFOs. Well, it goes back 51 years, 1955, when I was given this book the book is by Major Donald Kehoe. It was given to me by a cousin in America, and I was immediately excited because this book describes sightings by highly qualified observers such as military pilots, airline pilots, and air traffic controllers. And the events that they reported frequently were tracked on radar, thus proving that even if the pilots had been hallucinating, the radar sets had not. I've always been crazy about aviation and space travel for as long as I can remember. In fact, my mother's baby book has an entry when I was about, I don't know, just a few months old, saying he appears to be fascinated by all manner of flying objects. Next slide, please. This is what I feared would happen. Martin, you may have to use the manual control. I'm missing half the slide. It's not working. Okay. This was in the Times newspaper, editorial last year, following the British enactment of the Freedom of Information Act. We've only had one since last year. The Americans have had one since 1966. And people think, this leads to sort of fantastic revelations. Well, the occasional exciting document turns up. But what it means in the UK is that we are no longer relying on so-called 30-year rule, or the 50-year rule, 75-year rule, 100-year rule, or never rule for the release of official government documents on any manner of subjects. And for example, this year in May, the British Ministry of Defence released a 465-page document on UFOs conducted by Defence Intelligence staff relating to unidentified aerial phenomena, classified secret UK eyes only. Now that was only written in 2000, 2001, so it's interesting that such a document would be released so prematurely compared to the old days of the 30-year, 50 and 75-year-old rules. Now here we have the editor of the Times saying, UFOs do not exist. It is official. Minutes of the Ministry of Defence Flying Saucer Working Party of 1961, actually it was 1951, were published yesterday to the earthbound prose of official reports. They recommend no more public money should be spent on chasing UFOs. Nonsense. The Ministry of Defence has continued to investigate UFO reports In 1978 alone, I was told by a scientific source doing classified work on the subject, £11 million was spent by the British government on the subject. Next slide. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next, sorry, that's the previous one. The automatic's not going to work, Martin, I don't think. Great. This was part of a full-page advertisement for Royal Air Force fighter controllers about 14 or 15 years ago in the Daily Express, a very popular newspaper in Great Britain. And as you can see, the Times says, of course, that UFOs do not exist. It's official. Here's a Ministry of Defence, Royal Air Force advertisement, whether it's reporting on unidentified objects, guiding fighter pilots, blah, blah, and so forth. Unidentified flying objects, per se, are a fact. Anybody tells you to the contrary, tell them that to perceive the difference between a flying saucer from another planet, extraterrestrial, spaceship, or whatever, an unidentified flying object, they are not synonymous. A UFO is not synonymous with a weird spaceship from elsewhere. And we know that up to 90% of all UFO reports can be explained in conventional terms. Next, please, Martin. Thank you. My latest book, Need to Know, begins with official investigations in Australia, 1920, 1930, mostly around the Bass Strait area, which is Australia's, or one of Australia's, Bermuda Triangles, where there's some extraordinary things being said to be occurred, such as disappearing aircraft and ships. But this is an Italian government, highly confidential report leaked to researchers in Italy, and it's very interesting because it describes the crash of an unknown flying object, and it's one of many documents which were released to Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni about 8 or 9 years ago, describing Mussolini's interest in the subject and the establishment of a top secret group called Special Research Number 33, or RS-33 as it was known. And there are a number of secret reports that are published in Pinotti's book. Interestingly, that group was directed by Marconi, the great engineer, scientist, and Mussolini, of course, officiated over a number of the meetings. But the Italian government was aware from the 1930s, as was the Swedish government, Australian government, British government, United States government, that things were going on in our sky in the 1930s, which we did not understand. We move forward now to 1942. There was an increase in sightings of UFOs reported by military, mostly military personnel, and here's an extraordinary 1942 document signed by General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff at the time, sent to President Roosevelt, classified secret. And it refers to an extraordinary event when unknown aircraft approached Los Angeles and witnessed by over 1 million people. There was a 5-hour air alarm, and the US Army anti-aircraft units expended 1,430 rounds of ammunition at unidentified aircraft, which of course the Americans believed at first were Japanese. They were not Japanese. As you can see, no casualties among our troops, no planes shot down. Actually, something was shot down and whisked away. We're not quite sure what it was, but there were witnesses. and the story appeared in one edition of the paper, but not the next. No American Army or Navy planes were in action. Right, they stayed on the runway, engines revved up. When they saw what the negative effect that 1,430 rounds of anti-aircraft had on these UFOs, they decided to stay put. Next. And this headline, you may have seen some headlines from this well-known event. And incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, may I show a show of hands of people who have been relatively unexposed to this subject. Perhaps people new who've been not sort of submitted to donkey's years of indoctrination. Just 2, 3, any advance? 4, 5. Great. Well, you're especially welcome because we're going to be going over some old territory, but I know that a lot of it will be new even to aficionados, including this headline: strange planes. No bombs fell, no aircraft down. Okay. And I hope you can see this picture clearly. It was taken by one of the Los Angeles main newspapers at the height of the attack, and it shows apparently the main craft, unknown craft, at the apex of these searchlights here. We're not quite sure what these are. They might be some of the other aircraft, unknown aircraft, because there were over a dozen of them. And it can also be explosions from anti-aircraft shells, or they might just possibly, some of them, especially down here, be lens flares. We simply don't know. Next. This report was released a few years ago by the National Archives in Britain. And if we can just have, if you can sharpen the focus just a little bit, it does go out of focus periodically, so Alicia, thank you, that's perfect. It's just for me. This was classified secret. It relates to sightings by Lancaster pilots. And one included an object 200 to 300 feet in length, with a width estimated at 1/5 or 1/6 of its length, with an estimated speed of 500 miles an hour. Now, that was during a raid on Turin. At the bottom paragraph, it says that the captain also saw another one of these objects north of Amsterdam. In this instance, it appeared to be on the ground and later traveling at high speed at a lower level. UFO researchers tend to class any UFOs seen during the Second World War as Foo Fighters. That was a nickname given to UFOs by the Americans, specifically by bomber pilots. But the fact of the matter is that a number of huge objects were sometimes seen. Next slide, please. This is the Lancaster Mark III bomber, the most common bomber used by the Royal Air Force in bombing raids on Germany during the war. And in 1944, in addition to those sightings in 1942, there was a sighting by the entire crew over France, returning from a bombing run. When a plane, as master bomber, which had led the bombing raid, there was a crew and the observer, radio observer, a guy called Claridge, who held the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, reported that this craft was absolutely enormous, and he made a sketch. You can see the next slide, please. There is what the guys in the Lancaster saw, and there's their plane, just for comparison. When they landed at their squadron's base in England, they were surprised to see more than the usual number of Air Force intelligence members for the debriefing. Now, the Americans through the US Army, had fired at UFOs in 1942, possibly on subsequent occasions, but in 1945 came the first instance, according to my information, when a pilot was sent up to intercept a UFO and try and shoot it down. And here is the pilot. This took place at Selfridge Army Airfield near Detroit in July of 1945. But, you know what? The pilot wasn't American. The airfield commander asked for someone, he asked for a volunteer. Would anybody like to go up and have a go at these Japanese? Because they assumed that these were Japanese balloons. They were seen over Selfridge Air Force Base. So this Frenchman of a French Free Air Force detachment based with the Americans at Selfridge Field, Monsieur Jean Kisling, a delightful man. I've met him many times in Paris. He went up in a P-47 Thunderbolt, and he had to go very, very high. These things were zipping around at a very high level. And he got one of them in his sights, and it appeared as absolutely a round circle. He let rip with all 8 machine guns on the Thunderbolt plane. Immediately, this Japanese balloon flipped on edge and shot off to the right at a phenomenal speed. And at that point, when Jean was describing that to me, he said, "I realized then it was no balloon." And he was fated like a hero when he landed. So as far as we're aware, that was the first instance of someone actually shooting at these things, to no effect on this occasion. Come 1946, in the summer, there were sightings of what became known loosely as ghost rockets or spook bombs. They were unidentified flying objects, whatever, and they were seen actually in many continents, in the Soviet Union, India, Greece, Turkey, but particularly in the Scandinavian region and Sweden in particular. And here's just part of a top secret United States Naval Intelligence document about these events. No tangible evidence to date as to the nature or origin of rockets reported over Sweden, although Swedish defense staff insists that they are rockets. Blah, blah, it goes on. The predominating theory at the time was that these things were Russian-captured V-2 rockets and other types of, like the flying bombs, pulse jet weapons, which rained on London and elsewhere during the Second World War. But these things didn't really look like rockets. For a start, rockets need fins, otherwise they need guidance. And these rockets did not have any fins. And they often exploded right over cities like Stockholm. They often dived into lakes and stayed there. Let's have a look at another slide. These are Saab B-18 twin-engine bombers of the Royal Swedish Air Force. One of these bombers collided with a mystery rocket. And here's the headline from next slide, please, Martin. Thank you. There we have it. Washington Post. Next, please. Of course, the crew was killed and it was disastrous. Fast forward to 1947. In early 1947, the United States government had captured numerous V2s and V1s and other experimental materials from Peenemünde and other bases in the former Nazi Germany. And of course, a team headed by Werner von Braun came over to the United States under Operation Paperclip, as it was known. And they started developing the V2s. This is the first V2 being readied for launch in White Sands. White Sands was kind of a very sensitive area. They were developing atomic bombs there. A lot of nuclear physicists were involved. A lot of top secret stuff was going on. but they actually started firing these rockets. And on a number of occasions, one in particular, observed by numerous military witnesses and confirmed by the commanding officer of White Sands, an unidentified object approached a V2, flew around it briefly, and caused it to, I was going to say crash, but all rockets crash, to land well short of its trajectory. Let's just have a look. There we are. The German V2 rocket launched at White Sands Proving Grounds Thursday afternoon, landed only 6 miles east of Alamogordo, the town of Indian Springs. Peculiar phenomena were blamed by Lieutenant Colonel Harold R. Turner, commanding officer of White Sands, for the erratic test flight. And that was one of several disturbing incidents. This led to the Americans, the United States Army in particular, renewing their effort to shoot one or more of these discs, as they were then called, down. And this happened in May of 1947. At least one of these craft was knocked out of the sky, later on in June as well. But in May, following the first one being shot down by the United States Army, they started off with conventional anti-aircraft fire to get these things down, and then they used ground-to-air missiles, apparently, allegedly. I say all this allegedly, I wasn't there, it's all denied officially, except for this kind of statement. Ground-to-air missile with a proximity fuse, so that the device would explode in the vicinity of the UFO, because they knew they couldn't necessarily target them precisely. And this brought at least one of them down. Then what happened? There was an unprecedented wave worldwide of aircraft accidents. Not just military planes, though mostly military interceptors were involved, but bombers, cargo planes, airliners as well. Let's just have a look at one of the headlines. It was round the world, simultaneously, sometimes on the same day, worldwide. In one country, there had been dozens of plane crashes. Planes could not get off the ground in many cases, or unstick in aviation terms. The official explanation, airliners, crashed 3 minutes after takeoff from Idlewild, LaGuardia or wherever in New York. Official explanation, aircraft ran out of fuel. Well, planes do run out of fuel. I'm aware of an accident in Great Britain, which I actually went to see the downed plane, which landed well short of the airport because the plane had not been filled with enough fuel. But it's very rare, quite honestly. So people believed it. And this is why this story hasn't leaked out. And it's thanks to a guy called John Andy Kistner, a former New Mexican state representative for Las Cruces and a former employee in the aerospace industry, who has given me and a few other researchers this information. And I went out to meet Andy in Arizona, spent a lot of time with him on 2 occasions, 2 years running, and he's absolutely on the level. And this information is really, I found it quite shocking, because I wasn't aware of it, and there were hardly any other UFO researchers who were aware of it at the time, though of course we're all aware that many aircraft and planes have gone missing during interceptions. Next, please. That was in May of 1947. Yeah, you can go back on it. I'll try and decipher it if I can. I don't think I've it's in my book. Get the book. It is the date is in the book, of course. Thanks. Next, Martin. I think most of you, even those who are not that familiar with the subject, will be aware of rumors that the United States Army Air Forces captured a flying saucer, one or more, in the first week of July of 1947. This is the headline from the Roswell Daily Record. Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch. Confirmed, it was found by a rancher, confirmed by an intelligence officer, Jesse Marcel, who said that there's no question, the materials that he handled from his craft were like nothing he was familiar with. It created fantastic excitement worldwide. Then the lid came down. So much excitement was created that a cover-up or a containment strategy in army terms was initiated. Next, please. The next day, headlines, Roger Ramey was up at Fort Worth. Ramey empties saucer was the headline in one of the papers. And there was a press conference at Fort Worth. And there's Roger Ramey on the left and General Dubose on the right. This is important. And the remains of a crashed balloon were displayed at this press conference. They said there was no flying saucer, this was just the remains of a weather balloon. Right? Wrong. You can just sharpen the focus a bit, Martin. Thank you. This is an affidavit, a sworn affidavit, obviously by Brigadier General Thomas Jefferson Dubose, confirming that there was a cover-up. The material shown in the photographs taken in Major General Ramey's office was a weather balloon. The weather balloon explanation for the material was a cover story to divert the attention of the press. Quite frankly, I don't think they could have done anything else at that time. Let's consider the next slide, please. This is General Clements McMullen, who was Deputy Chief of Strategic Air Command at this time. Via President Truman, I assume, he was given the order for a cover-up, and that was instigated immediately following the Roswell recovery. And McMullen told Dubose, he said, look, you know, we've just gone through a world war with destruction on an unprecedented scale. Firebombing of great cities, atom bombs on Japan. Then came this flying saucer business. It was simply too much for the public to have to deal with. I quite agree. He might have added, it was also a great deal too much for the military to have to deal with. Now, the United States Air Force has published several debunking explanations for the incident at Roswell. One of them which says, oh, it was really a top secret mobile balloon. And it's a very thick tome, it's extremely heavy, it's quite expensive, the pagination is wrong, there's no index, but apart from that, it's one of the most comprehensive books on the structure of balloons that I've encountered in my life. Now, one of the Air Force treaties explaining the Roswell incident refers to the nurse that Glenn Dennis, who worked at the Ballard Funeral Home and was contracted to the Roswell Army Airfield. He actually spoke to a nurse, friend of his, and he never ever gave her name away. Once he gave a false name away to test someone, and of course immediately it was flooded all over the place, so that person, he knew that person could not be trusted. He actually has not given the name away. But the United States Air Force says, we know who the guy was that Dennis claims was the nurse who attended the autopsy of one of the autopsies of some of the alien beings at Roswell Army Airfield following the crash. We know who it was. And they've located records of First Lieutenant Eileen M. Phantom, and there are details about her in the book. And while, of course, dismissing all possibility that she was connected with the actual autopsy, they surprisingly supply a lot of confirmation for all the details that Glenn Dennis has provided about this woman, about her background, minus her name, of course. So I find that intriguing, you know, so the Air Force have helped us here. Next. And this is a sketch by Glenn Dennis based on the description given him by Lieutenant Phantom of the creature that she claims to have been involved with the autopsy. She said it was about 3.5, possibly to 4 feet high. The bodies were in relatively bad condition, some of them not so bad. But this one, she said, you couldn't tell what the eyes looked like because they'd been out in the desert for quite some time. It gets kind of hot in New Mexico in summer. And the eyes had actually shrunk, but they could tell from the bone structure that obviously the eyes must have been fairly large to fit in this area here. Hardly any nose, hardly any mouth, hardly any ears. Fingers with just 4 fingers, no opposable thumb, and apparent suction caps on the tip of the fingers. She said the skull was flexible, they had no teeth, and sort of like a thick cartilage instead. Next, please. Now, I published in a previous book, Beyond Top Secret, details of an extraordinary case which I thought was apposite to revisit in Need to Know. But I've included, absolutely new, I didn't publish it in the other, the actual sketch done by a Polish biophysicist. The story is that in 1974, this biophysicist, given the pseudonym Dr. Chris, was together with a team of Polish, Italian, British and French scientists who were contracted to NASA to look at some very weird materials, and they were asked to analyze them. They were told they came from behind the Iron Curtain. They analyzed these things, and there was flexible metal, which always went back to its original shape. The melting point was 2,000 degrees Celsius. All sorts of other materials. That's kind of interesting. But in 1977, same group of international scientists, small international group of scientists, including, of course, the Polish biophysicist Dr. Chris, was at a party at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, where it's the headquarters of the unmanned space program attached to the University of California. And here is a sketch done by Dr. Chris of more materials that he and the other team of scientists were taken several levels below at a vault, a sealed vault, which they got into thanks to the director. I think they probably had a few drinks at the time. It was to celebrate the retirement of the head of this particular project. And he said, hey guys, come downstairs and I'll show you a few things. And they got in. And they saw not only some of the materials that they handled back in 1974, but these extraordinary skeletal remains, including a hip bone and part of the cranium there, most of the cranium. Now, Dr. Chris, being a biophysicist, said this wasn't the skeleton of a baby or a chimpanzee. He said that the bone structure was quite different, the makeup of the bone. And he learned some more. He started asking questions. And he learned that there had been at least 2 incidents. These remains, by the way, were labeled from the 2 incidents in New Mexico. No specifics or dates were given. There had been at least 2 incidents, he was told, 1 survivor. There was blood similar, but not the same as ours, in that it showed a totally different reaction toward hydrogen. Not toward oxygen, very important correction, sorry about that. It showed a totally different reaction toward oxygen, in that nitrogen was no good for them. So inside the ship, they surmised that they must breathe a mixture of helium and oxygen. Next, please. Now, talking about materials presented from the Iron Curtain, Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso wrote an astonishing book which was co-authored, not altogether accurately, by William J. Burns. I think it was published in 1995, the day after Roswell, in which Corso came out and admitted that he'd been involved in a top-secret program to steward recovered alien artifacts into the American industrial giants, which ultimately led to fantastic developments in computer technology. You can see here, super tenacity fibers, fiber optics, circuit chips, and so forth. Well, a lot of people complained. They said, hey, you know, I was working on that at that time, and how come these are alien? What actually, Corso, he had not checked. This is the story. It might be an excuse, I don't know. But the story is that he spoke to a scientist friend of mine, and he said, actually, we waited until our people were starting to work in those particular areas before passing them to them and saying that we got them from behind the Iron Curtain. There have been queries about Philip Corso's background, people saying he never worked in the National Security Council. Well, the actual records I have received and I have reproduced in Need to Know, showing that not only did he work he wasn't on the National Security Council per se, he worked in the National Security Council's staff, particularly on the most sensitive committee in the United States government, known as the Special Coordinations Committee, or the Special Group, sometimes called 5412, or there's all sorts of other names for it, which you can read about in the book. And in this, as I say, this outfit, Special Coordinations, was involved in the most sensitive operations affecting the United States government. So Corso was well placed at that time. Next. According to Clark McClelland, a NASA engineer involved in a lot of work with the astronauts, he knew Werner von Braun, and he claims that Werner von Braun was one of those who, together with a team, was taken to examine the crashed Roswell craft and bodies, and he gives a description of them. It's astonishing how often the United States Air Force, for example, contradicts its public policy, contradicts its own documented reports. So here's a report from 1947. It was classified secret, it's 3 pages, and it concludes the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. There are objects, probably approximating the shape of a disk of such appreciable size as to appear to be as large as man-made aircraft. Of course, later on they discovered that there were all manner of craft coming here, but that's official. It's an official, previously secret document released by the United States government. Next, please. Many of you here in this room will be aware of one of the first crashes of a UFO during the pursuit thereof by military aircraft. And this was Captain Thomas Mantell flying a P-51 Mustang aircraft and with other wingmen, and they were directed toward an unknown flying object in the vicinity of Godman Airfield in Kentucky, January 1948. And Mantell decided to go alone. There are rumors that he didn't have any oxygen. Other people have said he was the only one that had sufficient oxygen to go up to 30,000 feet. Anyway, here's part of a secret US Air Force intelligence report. Just a paragraph on the incident. Unless you're extraterrestrial in origin, I think you'll have difficulty reading it, so I will read it out for those of you who are not. On the 7th of January 1948, a National Guard pilot was killed while attempting to chase an unidentified object up to 30,000 feet. While it is presumed that this pilot suffered anoxia, that's oxygen starvation, resulting in his crash. His last message to the tower was, "It appears to be a metallic object of tremendous size, directly ahead and slightly above. I'm trying to close for a better look." And those were his last words, because, next please, later the wreckage of his plane, some people said it exploded close to the ground before impact. Other people said it exploded in the ground at some considerable altitude. There were conflicting accounts. But anyway, other people have said that the photographs of the debris have never been shown. Well, there are lots of photographs, many of them on the net. This is one of the better ones. The so-called ghost rockets continue to make an appearance. Here's one from July 1948, reported by 2 Eastern Airline pilots in a DC-3 over Alabama. You can see a sort of rocket, generally rocket-shaped object but without any fins as far as we can tell here, and ports or openings of some kind. Not many ufologists are aware of this report. I'm sure some of our veteran reporters will have copies already, but it's top secret. It comes from the United States Air Force's Europe. The date is November of 1948, and it talks about a meeting between US Air Force intelligence officers and their Swedish counterparts. I'll just read some sections. When officers of this directorate recently visited the Swedish Air Intelligence Services, this question was put to the Swedes about the intelligence shown by some of these UFOs. Their answer was that some reliable and fully technically qualified people have reached the conclusion that these phenomena are obviously the result of a high technical skill which cannot be credited to any presently known culture on Earth. They are therefore assuming that these objects originate from some previously unknown or unidentified technology, possibly outside the Earth. Well, in 1948, one US Air Force estimate, top secret estimate of the situation, concluded that the unexplained UFOs were almost certainly extraterrestrial in origin. What happened? Well, General Vandenberg, who was United States Air Force Chief of Staff at the time, ordered the copy to be burnt. He said there's absolutely no way, according to Captain Ruppelt, who headed Project Blue Book, Vandenberg thought simply that there would be pandemonium, universal panic if this report was released. So it was ordered to be burnt. Of course, a few copies survived. But there's the actual request. Destruction of Air Intelligence Report number so-and-so. It is requested an action be taken to destroy all copies of top secret Air Intelligence Report, blah, blah, and so. Analysis of flying object incidents in the US, dated 10th December 1948. In 1949, there was an awful lot going on in the nuclear field, particularly in New Mexico, particularly around White Sands, Sandia Laboratories, all those places. And the flying discs were buzzing all over the place, obviously alarmed at the developments going on planet Earth. And this is just part of, I've got numerous classified documents which have been released officially, showing just how concerned America's top physicists were at the time. There's a number of them mentioned here. You can read about it in the book, but there was Theodore von Karman, for example, was an extremely distinguished scientist, and many other people were involved in investigating these reports, and secret and top secret conferences were being held all the time in the late 1940s. Next, please. It's interesting that in Project Sign, that was one of the US Air Force's first investigations, official investigations into UFOs, they hypothesized as follows. Such a civilization might observe that on Earth we now have atomic bombs and are fast developing rockets. In view of the past history of mankind, they should be alarmed, and we should therefore expect, at this time above all, to behold such visitations. Next, please. This is a very interesting document, 1950, from the office of the Surgeon General, thank you very much, from the Chief of the Medical Research Division, to Dr. Evans of MIT. So he encloses memorandum reports on psychological analysis of reports of UFOs. And it says here, I have also received information that a new report is in the process of being published and will be classified top secret. I regret to say that I do not know what this latest report contains. However, I will attempt to get a copy as soon as it is published. It has recently been rumoured that thank you very much. Can you sharpen it up just to my eyes only? Thank you. One of these flying saucers crashed in Mexico. However, the details are somewhat bizarre at this moment. Next picture. Okay, this is part of a 3-page top secret, hitherto classified Canadian government document by Wilbert Smith. Aficionados are familiar with it, but I think it never does any harm to show it. I show it at all my lectures, no matter to whom. And it is from Wilbert Smith, a Canadian government engineer who had top secret clearance. He worked in intelligence and in radio electronics. And he quotes here, "The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the hydrogen bomb." Well, you can guess how sensitive the hydrogen bomb was in 1950. But flying saucers, they're more sensitive. Flying saucers exist. Their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. Bush was a prime mover behind the Manhattan Project, the top secret, plus code words, successful effort to produce America's first atom bombs. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. Well, regarding the United States authorities, relatively few people actually had access to what amounted to above top secret information, which I will explain later. Next, please. Interestingly, that information provided by Wilbert Smith was obtained from the American scientist Dr. Robert Sarbacker of the Research and Development Board. And there's part of a letter that Sarbacker wrote to William Steinman, an American researcher. He confirms that there was a recoverer. He claims not to know the dates. He says that John Neumann, famous mathematician, was involved, Vannevar Bush, and Robert Oppenheimer, he suggests, as well as Werner von Braun, possibly involved in the reported recoveries. Next. Now, this photograph was taken during the Korean War by a Marine Air Group photographer flying an F-86 photographer. I don't know the name of the photographer, but thanks to Glenn Steckling, I've been provided with lengthy details from a gentleman who was involved at the time. He was not the photographer, but I'm looking forward to meeting him. Glenn knows him well. This particular man knew Adamski well too. So there's a lot more information about this case now has been made available to me. But the pilot said, I hope I've got that right, Glenn, because I only got this information a few hours ago. Is that right so far, if you're here? Ah, all right. Anyway, he said the brilliant, it was absolutely brilliant on the top of the craft and pitch black underneath and slightly distorted. And it was so bright that it apparently affected the emulsion of the film to a certain extent. Yes, it was taken in the South China Sea, by the way. Well, I'm not going to spend long on this, but of course, many of George Adamski's pictures are absolutely genuine, and this was one of his many photographs taken through a telescope, showing a large craft, so-called mothership, about 1,500 feet in length, and the smaller craft, which are stored on them, surrounded by a force field of some kind. Some people think it's a plasma field. It's certainly ionized air, electrically charged air, that's for sure, that much we know. Almost certainly related to the propulsion system of some of these craft, at least. Next, please. Just sharpen that up a little bit. Thank you. This is part of the Britain's top secret flying saucer working party recommendations. It only went from 1950 to 51. They were liaising with the Americans. who come over, and they're actually persuading the Brits to play down the whole subject. And I'm quite sure, there's no evidence of this, that the Americans suggested to the Brits that they particularly play down those sightings reported by Royal Air Force and other pilots, ones that carry greater credibility. Anyway, this is just following the lead by the Americans on the subject. The report should, he thought, have as little publicity as possible, and outside circulation should be confined to Sir Henry Tizard, the British government advisor. And that was the dissolution of the Flying Saucer Working Party. Next, please. And here's a pilot, Flight Lieutenant Hubbard, test pilot at Farnborough, on the ground, 1951, other test pilots around, when a large flying saucer comes over this very important testing base, seen by a number of pilots at low level, making a crackling sound and a strange humming sound, smelling of ozone, sparks going off the edge of the rim, and they were all watching this thing go over. And of course they reported it. They were visited by the Flying Saucer Working Party, who were very impressed, took details. When the report was released 50 years later at least, it came out that the pilots obviously had mistaken this flying saucer for some conventional aircraft, the description of which they weren't familiar with. Next, please. That pilot, incidentally, and the others involved, were absolutely livid when they saw that report. Now, new ground I'm touching in Need to Know involves a lot of sightings I've got there at sea. These things not only seen at sea, but they often go under the sea. We'll come to that more later. But they've been reported on aircraft carriers, destroyers, all types of smaller craft throughout the world. Later on, the second half of my presentation, which we'll be coming to shortly, I'll be talking about China, Soviet Union, Turkey, Iran, all over. These things come from all over. They're not just American or Australian or British. But anyway, this was a report in 1952 when things really began to hot up near Hawaii, when squadron or two of these craft, this one came very close, was seen by the crew on a Royal Canadian Navy ship. (1952), sightings popping up, and they started particularly around the nation's capital, American nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Just a few headlines. There's another one. The next one, please, Martin. Thank you. Next. Pilots on standby. And unidentified submarine objects, or you can say submergible objects, whichever, doesn't matter. I prefer submergible because submarines normally stay underwater most of the time, whereas USOs can be anywhere, under the sea, in the sky, space, wherever. And they've been seen entering the Earth's oceans and leaving them for hundreds of years. There are very, very interesting reports, in the old days at any rate, in ships' logs, but in recent years, since the 40s and 50s, they have generally been, the official policy is, they have been expunged or doctored in official logbooks. And there's a great case coming up later. Here's a case, my contacts in Washington, I've tried to persuade them to get these reports released. This is part of a secret, officially declassified US Air Force intelligence report from a very special group, an Air Force special group investigating UFOs within Air Force intelligence. And it's about possible connection of submarine contacts with flying discs. Attached are 9 reports of submarine contacts, Office of Naval Intelligence serials listed below. That's all we get. Nothing, no details. No one's prepared yet to release those documents or in details thereof. Now, hitherto, I have spoken about an incident possibly in Nevada or Arizona, May of 1953, by a guy called Fritz Werner, attached to a US Air Force recovery team, exposed to a crashed craft and bodies. Well, I don't think I've reproduced the document, so the actual affidavit here before, which was obtained in the presence of Raymond Fowler, a well-known American investigator, and I decided to publish it in my book. And here it is for the first time. You can read about the craft, unusual shape and everything, and hatch, bodies inside, details. And for the first time, I have released this name. It's not Fritz Werner. His name was Arthur Stansel. And he has a very impressive background. Let's have a look at the next slide. That's just part of his CV for the relevant period. Performed engineering design of Air Force engine test cells. Also performed research and development of techniques for determining blast effects on buildings and structures. Was project engineer for Air Force buildings and structures portion of Operation Upshot Knothole, held at the Atomic Proving Ground, Nevada. And that's when this incident happened, and he was on detachment for that. And there's just some of his publications, just a fraction of his publications. Next, please. And the next box, please. Thank you. We can talk partly amongst ourselves. Okay. This is an F-9F Panther jet fighter of the US Navy or Marine Corps, and at Edenton, North Carolina, in 1953, a pilot it was quite common at least in the 1950s, the pilot was scrambled to pursue an unknown flying object. He went up, he didn't get very close to it, but at one stage, a beam of light penetrated the cockpit. That's not him, by the way, but it penetrated the cockpit, and everything, he said, he seemed to be suspended in time and space. He couldn't hear the engine properly. Everything seemed to have gone quiet. And this beam of light penetrated his hand so that he could see actually the skeletal structure beneath. It acted like an X-ray. It's just one of the many bizarre things that have happened to pilots. Next. This one was much more disturbing. This is an F-94C Starfire interceptor. Also in 1953, this was at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts on the coast. There was an alarm. The plane was scrambled to chase a UFO over the base. They took off. They got to within, I don't know how many hundred feet off the ground. But suddenly everything conked out. Engine, the whole lot. So the pilot ordered, there was a radar observer behind, and the pilot was in front. Normally the radar observer, because of the canopy ejection system, would eject first, but he wasn't responding, and the pilot then ejected since they were so close to the ground. He landed safely, his parachute just having opened in the nick of time, and he expected confidently to see the radar observer land not too far from him. And what happened? The radar observer was never found, and the aircraft was never found, despite rescue search lasting for months. The only thing that was recovered was the canopy, of course, which fell to earth at the time that the pilot had ejected. There were quite a number of incidents like that, and more will come to light, I'm sure, as time goes by. I'm not the first to bring this out. Major Donald Kehoe, the great pioneer, was the first to bring these stories out to the public. Next. This is Frederick C. Durant III. As an ensign in the 1940s, he served with the United States Navy. Later, he became famous for the so-called Durant report, or the Robertson Panel report by the CIA, 1953, which set out to debunk UFOs because of all sorts of adverse situations that were developing, clogging official channels and all manner of reasons. But I had the pleasure of spending a whole day with this delightful gentleman, and he said, "Timothy, you're still chasing these flying saucers." Lovely guy. He was, he's a charming gentleman, and he's a loyal citizen. It's all nonsense, but I know perfectly well, and he knows that I know that he knows. He was very deeply involved, and in fact, he told me, he said, I was attached as a consultant from naval intelligence to the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. He won't admit it, of course, but one of his main specialities, of course, was UFO investigations. Next. Sorry, I'll wait. Here we go. It's just a radar shot of UFOs taken by a US Air Force plane in the Bermuda region. Downward-looking radar. 2 radar scope photographs there with 10 minutes in interval showing these objects. People often ask me why it is that, aliens don't approach our world leaders, take us to your leader. Well, they have. There's a famous story, controversial, but I think it's true. And a number of new witnesses have come forward, testifying that in February 1954, President Eisenhower was sent to meet the extraterrestrials, the human variety, at Muroc Top Secret Air Force Base, California, now Edwards Air Force Base. And a number of people have been named. The names are in the book, some of the new names. Various researchers have interviewed people. And I really do think it happened. The official explanation was that Eisenhower was having his attack put on his tooth, but there's absolutely no dental records that have been produced. So he disappeared. He was due to appear at a press conference, and he disappeared for 4 hours or so. Anyway, this is another leader. He was Deputy Chief of Strike Command in Great Britain, the Royal Air Force, with his finger on the nuclear trigger. All right? Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley. Not only was he a very fine pilot for numerous types of aircraft, but he had been equerry, military attaché to the Queen and Prince Philip for 7 years at Buckingham Palace. And it was during that period at Buckingham Palace that Sir Peter claims in his autobiography, he gave me more information which I published in Alien Base, he claims to have had a 2-hour meeting with a human-type extraterrestrial being in the middle of London, which he found extremely disturbing. The guy didn't say, hey, I'm Zog from Venus or whatever. None of that. He didn't even say it was from another planet, but he implied it. And what Sir Peter found particularly disturbing was that this guy, whoever he was, could read his mind. Most particularly disturbing, he told me, which he didn't publish, but he told me not that long before he died, was that this guy knew all Britain's top secret nuclear secrets. Right, next slide. Well, we don't have time, but I've revisited this story in encapsulated form in Need to Know. And Sir Peter learned a great deal that there are several species involved coming here. Aliens are have been coming and going for millennia, and we are regarded by many as a somewhat backward species who have become rather dangerous or late. And so Peter was told that aliens are able, or at least his group, are able to manipulate dimensions, which is very interesting in view of what Martin Lotshaw was talking about this morning. I think you'll agree. Able to manipulate dimensions, and they were able to take care of themselves by this means. They were able to manipulate space-time travel, all sorts of things. And they said, or this guy said, that they had infiltrated in great secrecy, the better to keep an eye on what we were up to. Now, 1955, former General of the Army, Douglas MacArthur, stated to the Mayor of New York, this is what Achille Lauro said, MacArthur believes that because of the developments of science, all the countries on Earth will have to unite to survive and to make a common front against attack by people from other planets. Heavy stuff. Next, please. Sightings, fantastic sightings, approaches. This is a possibly nuclear-armed bomber, a B-36. Peacemaker, it was called. 10 engines, 2 outboard jet turbine engines, and turboprops the rest. Anyway, in 1956, on the Dakota borders of the Dakotas, this craft, 17-man crew and a relief crew, encountered a huge flying disc. Next. This is my sketch, by the way. Unfortunately, it's not a photograph because most of the members said they took photographs of this object, which approached very close to the plane, and it was there for about 8 minutes. These cameras, special Hain cameras, had been issued by the Air Force's Project Blue Book in just such an eventuality for crew members to take photographs of flying saucers or whatever. And of course, as soon as they landed, everything was confiscated. But a number of witnesses have come forward. And this is information which I published thanks to Richard Haynes, who's done a lot of work on this case. Next, please. Gordon Cooper, pioneer astronaut. I never met him, but we communicated. And in 1951, he was at Neubiberg Air Force Base, US Air Forces Europe, based there when the UFOs were frequently seen, and he and of course other planes were sent up to chase them. Later on in F-86 Sabre jets, but they could never get anywhere near them. But in 1957, Cooper states, he stated it many years running, and in his autobiography, as has been mentioned earlier in this conference, that, I don't think this factor was mentioned, but in 1957, a flying disc actually landed at the top secret Edmonds Air Force Base, witnessed by Cooper's camera crew. They were expecting more conventional type of craft to appear. This is a test flight place. Anyway, this flying saucer, about 30 feet diameter, extended legs, landed, was filmed in color, probably 35mm color, all black and white, the whole lot. Cooper phoned up Washington and he was told, get that film developed and sent by pouch immediately to Washington. And Cooper managed to sneak a look at some of the frames, and he said it was absolutely crystal clear. And he told me, he thinks that one day that document, that film we might all be able to see. Let's hope so. Thank you. Thank you. This is interesting for several reasons. It's one of 4 flying saucers, complete with the spheres underneath. They're not landing gear per se, just as the ones similar to the ones photographed by George Adamski. But this was a sighting by a US Air Force pilot near Tonopah, Nevada in 1957. 4 of these craft were on the ground, and he approached them to within, I think, about 50 feet, something like that, and he was able to observe a lot of detail. They eventually took off after about, I think it was about 20 minutes, something like that. They took off, and he was able to provide a lot of data. And this is an official drawing by the US Air Force's Project Blue Book staff. Next. Extraordinary operations and training order issued to the most United States Air Force and other military bases. But this one is very, very interesting. The phenomena or aerial objects comprising UFOs will tend to increase with the public more aware of goings-on in space, but still inclined to some apprehension. technical and defense considerations will continue to exist. Flying saucers must be rapidly and accurately identified as serious US Air Force business. Next, please. And this is from the New York Times in 1960. It refers to that serious business document. There's also a reference to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which was Major Kehoe's group, which later became infiltrated by CIA. And there is an interesting statement here by a former CIA director, the NICAP committee member, I believe, who was a former director of Central Intelligence. And he states, behind the scenes, Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. Next, please. Thank you. Just sharpen that up a little. This is an aircraft similar to the Air Force One flown in by President Kennedy. It's not the actual one, but thanks to a White House staff source, I have learned that in 1961-62, President Kennedy made a request to the military to view alien bodies stored in a certain Air Force base. And according to my information provided by this White House staff source, Kennedy was taken on Air Force One to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, accompanied by quite a few generals. I have no further details except that it was a top secret operation, and I'm told it's very unlikely if any information will be released for a very, very long time. Next. This is, in my opinion, one of the best photographs of a flying saucer available. It's taken by the co-pilot, first officer on an Avenza Airlines Douglas DC-4 in 1963 in Venezuela. And there is the flying disc. This is a highway, by the way. It's not a trail from the craft. There's the shadow of the disc on the jungle beneath. And there is the shadow of the DC-4. And very importantly here, to get perspectives and things, this is one of the propeller spinner where the propellers are actually stuck on a central hub. So you've got some idea. And that is definitely a DC-4. And I find that apparently all the professional topographer and another engineer have looked at the photograph, and all the shadows and objects tally with each other based on sun position and everything at that time. Next. Now, Glenn Steckling has shown us a lot of material from George Adamski, but I wanted to show you, because some of the pictures that he showed were rather of how they originally appeared. Some of them have been light enhanced by perfectly natural means, by just overexposing them slightly. And this is one frame, and from this extraordinary 8mm colour film taken in February of 1965 by George Adamski with Madeline Roedifer, a friend of mine, and two other people who were presumably liaising with the guys in the craft. They weren't in spacesuits. These were people dressed absolutely normal, everyday gear. And they were warned, George and Madeline, that this craft was going to appear and to get your cameras ready. According to an optical physicist, Bill Sherwood, the object was 27 feet in diameter. One of these spheres, as Glenn explained yesterday, was raising up and down, causing distortions. They're not distortions in the craft. They're caused by, in my opinion, purely my opinion, and Bill Sherwood, optical distortions caused by the force field associated with the gravitational propulsion. And portholes could be seen, but they don't show up very, very clearly on these frames. And just the next slide, please. This was the principal witness, Madeline Roedifer. If any of you want to talk to her about it, or you can talk to Glenn about it, he was I think, he was a boy, he was a youngster at the time. But Madeline was there. She's still alive, living in the States. She's 83, but very much compos mentis. Lovely lady. And they actually showed this film, she with Adamski, they showed it to, as Glenn explained earlier, that yesterday, that a lot of scientists at NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center, and a number of people in the United States Congress were well aware of this film. Now, fast forward, 1998, I was invited to the Defense Airborne Reconnaissance Office, as it was then, which handled the unmanned aerial vehicles, or to give it its politically correct term, uninhabited air vehicles, or UAVs. They handled that program, taking spy photographs. I'm sure you've seen the Predators and the Global Hawks. There's all manner of unmanned, remotely controlled probes flying all over the place. But anyway, the director invited me to the Pentagon. There was a half-hour meeting there, and I was expecting a one-to-one with the general to discuss matters of common interest. And in fact, there was a whole team of relatively new officers from the various forces there. And he gave me a lecture about what Dara, as it was then called, did, and then it was over to me, and so I sort of spoke about the subject. General Israel, this was General Kenneth Israel, director at the time, made a great play of laughing and saying, "Oh, flying saucers, nobody here in this building. I've never met anyone who's seen one. I've never even read a book on it or anything." Well, he knew, actually. I think he'd been forewarned that I might be giving him a copy of Beyond Top Secret. So, I gave him the book, and he said, "Hey guys, look at this Beyond Top Secret, wow." And he was still laughing, he was going through the papers. He said, he stopped and said, "I see you've done a lot of serious research here." Then he went through, and he got through to some pictures, some frames from a certain film. Guess what? The one that I've just shown you, that frame. And he said, "Who took these? Where were they taken? There's no way these can be fake." That's what he said, in front of the others. So I found that very interesting. Next. I've dealt with, thanks to Leslie Kane and others, American reporter, the Expunged, Pennsylvania crash landing of an unknown craft, 1965. Next, please. This is John Podesta, President Clinton's former chief of staff, who has supported the initiative to bring out the facts about the Kecksburg incident into the open. He says it's time for the truth to come out about this, it's against the law as well. So we really should demand to know what's going on of our government. Next. Just sharpen that up for my eyes only, thank you. This is about an incident in 1966 when a UFO was tracked all over the place, 100,000 feet, landing, buzzing around all over the place, causing a great deal of excitement because this was an intercontinental ballistic missile site. Okay? And this is not a leaked document, it's officially released, reproduced in the book, by the way, along with a lot of other documents which you'll see. And it talks about glow, static, disrupted radio contact. Extraordinary amount of information in this declassified report. Hovering for 15 minutes. UFO then began to swoop and dive, appeared to land 10 to 15 miles south of one of the perimeters. Fast forward, please. 1968, a B-52H bomber coming into land at Mino Air Force Base was told by ground control to look out for something over part of the airfield on its to do a flight over that area, and the co-pilot who related this story says, well, what are we supposed to look for? And the guy says, you'll know when you see it. And sure enough, there was interruption. They had some radar, I think some radar, I can't remember, tell you the truth, that there was interference from this craft. They saw a very large object, possibly one other, but anyway, it landed, and this pilot describes an actual landed vehicle on the ground near a missile silo. Next. And there's part of a quite lengthy Project Blue Book report on the Reno Air Force Base incident of the B-52 of 1968. The object, size of the object on the scope, radar scope, larger than that of a KC-135. KC-135 is exactly the same size as that backup for President Kennedy's Air Force One. So that gives you an idea of the size of the UFO. Next, please. Well, what about the Soviet Union? We're going to go around the world now. In 1967, Professor Felix Ziegel of the Moscow Aviation Institute went on television with a retired Air Force general and stated to camera, "Unidentified flying objects are a very serious subject which we must study fully. We appeal to all Soviet citizens to send us details of any strange flying craft seen over the territories of the Soviet Union. This is a serious challenge to science, and we need the help of all Soviet citizens." Well, they were inundated with reports. A lot of excitement was generated worldwide. This tantamount to an official recognition by the Soviets that these things were for real. The Russians had hitherto been told that I think there was one famous occasion when Gromyko stated the only flying saucers that you're seeing are probably the discus thrown by our Olympics champion. Anyway, one of the first organisations to get interested was the Foreign Office, Britain's Foreign Office in London. And here it is. There's no way you're going to sharpen this one because some of the more interesting documents are sometimes not very clear. The British Embassy was directed Yes, you can, I think. Hi. Anyway, it says the British Embassy was directed by London. Thank you. The British Embassy was directed by London to further investigate the subject with a view to cooperating with the Russians in observation teams for UFOs. Interesting. Next, please. You can sharpen that one up a little, Martin. Thank you. This is an acknowledgement by General George Brown at a press conference in 1973 that unidentified flying objects were observed during the Vietnam War. And they often gave rise to conflict situations, but they could never find out who the enemy was. I should add that the UFOs weren't firing at anything, but we were firing at them. Next. This is a destroyer in Vietnam encountered an unidentified object which approached this destroyer and then dived beneath the ocean and went right underneath the ship. Next. 1971. Thanks to James Kopp, we've spoken also to the disclosure project. I got some few interesting details from him. James Kopp held top secret crypto clearance. He was a crippy dealing with the communications codes that came in. And in 1971 they were on exercise in the Caribbean area towards Cuba. when suddenly pandemonium, everything went berserk, communications, everything seized up, there was chaos, and most of the officers, the 5,000 crew members, were below decks because there'd been a very, very long exercise. People were tired, trying to get food and stuff. So I think one of the first things happens is that two Phantom jets tried to take off, to intercept, and they couldn't unstick, they couldn't get off the deck. But anyway, Kopf and a buddy went up just to below decks, and they saw this huge object hovering right above the USS John F. Kennedy, which is this aircraft carrier here. And there was chaos on board. And Jim told me that he reckons no more than about 18 people saw this object. But they were everyone was aware of the power failures, all sorts of bizarre electrical disturbances going on. Next. All the log entries were deleted, of course, about them. There are at least two logbooks on an aircraft carrier, all deleted or dealt with otherwise. This is a global phenomenon, ladies and gentlemen. India in 1976, for example, there was a lot of activity. This is a MiG-23 of the Indian Air Force. Had an encounter with a UFO. There were a number of occasions when Indian Air Force planes were sent to intercept jets. There was an extraordinary case of a Boeing 747 of Air India on its final approach, which was paced by a very large object on its final approach, as I say. Next. Phantom jets, one of America's great interceptor, the F-4, involved in numerous interceptions of UFOs, including in 1976 in Tehran. And let's just have the next slide. This is just one page of a secret US Air Force intelligence report relating to this incident when large UFO was seen over Tehran by thousands of citizens, possibly tens of thousands of citizens. And the Imperial Iranian Air Force, as it was then called, sent up 2 Phantom jets. Well, they got to within a certain distance, even within 25 nautical miles. There was interference, communications difficulties. Then they got nearer, and a smaller object detached from this large object and headed towards one of the F-4s. Well, they panicked. They tried to fire a Sidewinder missile at the UFO. Missile systems malfunctioned. They actually, it's not on this document, but on the Sightings report, they acknowledged that they tried to eject, but the ejection system malfunctioned. So they had to stay with the plane. Fortunately, they landed safely, and just for good measure, the UFO buzzed the base just after they landed, putting on an interesting display and causing a power blackout. As they did. Yeah, this is a French nuclear bomber, Mirage 4A. I spoke to the commander of one of these things at the Paris Air Show a few years ago, and he told me that in 1977, and there was an awful lot going on, by the way, including in Australia, a tremendous lot going on worldwide in 1977-78. Anyway, he and the navigator behind were approached by this huge object. He said it was at least the size of a jumbo jet, and they couldn't see, they were aware it was a very solid object. It wasn't tracked on ground, by the way, but they started trying to chase it, maneuver around it and everything. Every maneuver they made was more than matched by the UFO. So this usual sort of cat and mouse thing happened for some time, and they were very alarmed by it until the ground control started saying, "Hey, you guys, you lost your oxygen or something. What are you playing with up there?" And they said, "Well, we've got this huge thing, you know." And they said, "We don't see anything, we only see you." And of course, the crew knew that they're not supposed to do maneuvers in a nuclear bomber. So they were reprimanded, but the guys on the ground did believe them in the end. Next. A couple of months later, a Vulcan nuclear bomber of the Royal Air Force encountered a large UFO over the Bay of Biscay, and the official documents have been released about that case. Next. Also 1977, two Mirage F-1CZ interceptors of the South African Air Force disappeared in mysterious circumstances off the coast, not just the south, I think it was the Namibian coastline. Completely unexplained. I got this from someone from the meteorologist in the Ministry of Defence at the time in South Africa. And he said, obviously the pilots were desperately trying to communicate. They could hear the call button, but there was no communication, and that was the last evidence. They were never found, the aircraft were never found. So there's no evidence that it was a UFO per se, but something unexplained. Next. This extraordinary announcement in 2003 provoked hardly any response, but at least it appeared in the press. KGB chief ordered 4 million soldiers to keep watching the skies for UFOs. Well, this was Yuri Andropov, dreaded chief, one of the chiefs of the KGB, the Russian CIA. He was actually president of the Soviet Union for a short time. But he launched, under recommendations from his military, a huge 10-year top-secret UFO investigation program in 1977, when things had started to go berserk with sightings and military and everything, involving 4 million soldiers, and I'm guessing, I don't know, a million or so civil servants. Top secret, was classified Institute 22, that was the code name. And a number of Air Force and Army generals have confirmed the existence of this project. Next. Many of you will be familiar with the disappearance of the young pilots Frederick Valentich, I think it was 21st of October 1978, flying in a Cessna from Melbourne to Tasmania over the dreaded Bass Strait, where many disappearances of ships and aircraft have been reported over the years. But this was the first one really to make major headlines in many countries. And I've just included here in this slide that strange object is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft. And that was really the last that was heard from him. And there was a 5-day air-sea rescue search. Nothing was found. And there are some reports, other investigators here can put me right about this, but I know there was a report that a Cessna aircraft was found by divers. Some said it was the same registration number, other people dispute it. So I don't know about that. There are also rumours that Frederick Valentich has been spotted in a number of countries. I don't know. Next. This is from Puerto Rico. 2 young pilots flying from Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic in a light aircraft. Young guys like Valentich report sighting an unknown craft, a weird object in our course that made us change course about 3 different times. Mayday, mayday. We have a very weird object in front of us that make us lose course. Our present heading is 130 degrees at 1,000 pilots. That's virtually the last that was heard of those 2 young pilots. Again, despite the air-sea rescue search, of course. This is the American Defense Intelligence Agency report relating to events in Peru in 1980. Russian-built Sukhoi 22, I think, jet was sent to intercept a UFO, and he fired at it at very close range without causing any apparent damage. Next. Now, I think it was yesterday someone was talking about the Cash-Landrum incident involving 3 witnesses in a suburb of Houston. Called Huffman saw this weird craft in the sky. It was apparently trying to gain height. It was making a roaring sound. It came right over their car, and the witnesses, one of the witnesses, Betty Cash, was out of the car by that time. It literally irradiated them. It made the car very hot. And Betty Cash, next slide please, as did all the other witnesses, suffered from radiation sickness to a degree. the evidence suggests very strongly that this, rather than being an extraterrestrial vehicle, was actually a top-secret military project. And there's more data about that, various rumors, but that was 1980. You know, can you imagine, that's a long time ago. If they had things like that then, even if it didn't work properly, what have they got now? Next. Some UFOs are from here, probably American in origin. Famous Rendlesham Forest incident, 1980, December 1980, when the outside the twin Air Force bases, US Air Force bases, the Brentwaters and Woodbridge, a UFO was seen over several nights flying around. Tape recordings of the investigations were made. It actually touched the ground at one stage. There were US Air Force security personnel. This is all confirmed in this document, by the way. Most of it's confirmed. This is just part of a letter to the Ministry of Defense by Colonel Charles Holt, who was Deputy Base Commander at Woodbridge at the time. And he was one of the witnesses to some of these events. It went on several nights in December 1980. Extraordinary case. Triangular craft, 2 to 3 meters across and so forth. And there's a description here based on a description based on a sketch, rather, based on a description by one of the US Air Force security personnel. Next. The animal mutilations, I'm just going to touch on those because this is very disturbing. It's largely in North America, Canada, Central America, South America, and so forth. But also a number of other countries. But very, very seldom in Europe, I have to say. But anyway, typically animals are found completely exsanguinated, drained of blood with not a drop around. Vital organs excised with immaculate position. Whatever it is, it's done very quickly. And sometimes UFOs are seen in the vicinity. And occasionally people, I have interviewed one witness, for example, in Puerto Rico, who actually witnessed an animal being beamed up into a flying saucer and dumped later on, having been mutilated for whatever purpose. But it is definitely related. It is disturbing. It's not very pleasant, but as I always say to people, we mutilate millions more animals every day and eat them. Oh, I mean, that's another subject. So how does the press react to all this? I've been astounded by how many people believe this is a real bona fide news report. Yes, and I have to say that at one school, I usually give talks to what we call a sixth form, sort of 16 to 18-year-olds, but some juniors had been brought into the talk, and so eyes were popping open when they saw that. And the question came from the back, please sir, what happened to the orange? Back to military stuff here. This is a MiG-23 of the Soviet Air Force. Several reports had been encountered, but the interesting thing about this is that the aircrew were unable to acquire a radar contact on the object, but they were chasing this thing. And then it says, all of the pilots which observed the unidentified object were instructed to land immediately. The crews were ordered to never discuss the object they had observed. All available in official documentation. Next page. This is 1985. 2 pilots flying towards the Mojave Desert in California encountered this object, which actually approached them on a head-on collision course, just as a dark shape, and they took cover beneath the coning, that's the ledge protecting the instruments, and this thing shot past, and then the pilot, British guy, David Hastings, just sensed that there was something to the left, and he got his camera out and took several pictures, and that came out on one of them. Next. China. There's tremendous interest in China. And it's said that in let me just read what this, just part of what this says from a translation. This is about a conference in Dalian, which certain gentleman present today has been involved with investigations in China. There were 40 papers presented on this occasion. This article is about it. 40 papers, scientific papers on UFOs. There's a great interest in China, the article states, and 20,000 people are involved in UFO research. UFOs are an unsolved mystery exerting a profound influence around the world. And allegedly, by 1992, China had 3,600 formal members as well as 40,000 research members, associates. Most of Chinese UFO researchers are scientists and engineers. And many UFO groups require a degree and published research, peer-reviewed research for membership. So that's very interesting. Next. Japan Airlines jumbo jet flying near Anchorage, 1986, encounters an interesting shaped UFO, which appeared intermittently and sometimes intermittently on radar, on ground, and on the plane, a jumbo Japan Airlines cargo jet, actually. To give some idea of the size of this flying walnut, there's the Boeing 747 drawn by the Captain Terauchi for comparisons. Next. Remember I said, well, no, I didn't say, at Rendlesham, outside these twin Air Force bases in December 1980, at one point, the UFO, which had been skidding around for, several, had been skidding around for several nights in December 1980, beamed down lights at the nuclear weapons area, which at that time held more nuclear weapons than anywhere else in Europe. And a UFO did the same in Kapustin Yar, the former Soviet Union, Astrakhan, I believe, in, I think, 1986. And there it is, beaming lights down at the actual weapons storage area. Not necessarily nuclear, we don't know. I don't know what they were. It was at an army base observed by a number of military personnel. Next, please. This was shown, I think, yesterday at the conference. It's, I believe, a genuine photograph of one of the mysterious flying triangles seen around Europe by thousands of witnesses in 1989, 1990, also 1993, 1997. Next, please. And just the last few slides. I'll be winding up shortly, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, another incident in the Soviet Union. This is in 1990 in Kuibyshev, or it's reverted to the original name of Samara, and a triangular-shaped object approached the base, was seen on radar as an object, and then suddenly, as a triangular object, and suddenly the radar screen all faded and dissolved, and the thing came down at a radar base, manned by quite a number of army personnel. And the first thing it did, it landed, it shot a beam of light at one of the radar units here. These are portable radar units. There were quite a few of them, radar unit number 12. And the beam went right through a corporal there. He said it had the slightest effect on him, no effect at all, but it wiped out the radar station. Next. And a number of the soldiers had missing time at that event, by the way. Now, I reproduced this picture and many others taken over a long period, May to October, November 1993 in the Abruzzi mountains of Italy. We don't know what it is. It's a very, very long story. I don't have time to go into details now, but it's one of about 6 photographs of this creature. There's no communication. Let's just have a look at the next image here. This is a sketch by the principal witness of the creature standing up. It had atrophied arms and very, very powerful legs. It was able to leap huge heights. It made piercing, shrieking sounds. It was quite friendly, weird protuberances sticking out of its sternum there, which we don't know the reason. We don't know where it comes from, what it was, whatever, but it's a very interesting case. Next. We won't go into all this. Remember the Times saying UFOs don't exist? Remember that? Times is behind the Times. And here we are, Manual of Air Traffic Services. A controller receiving a report about an unidentified flying object must obtain as much as details to be telephoned to Air Information Service, Military, London Air Traffic Control Centre. So those are instructions for air traffic controllers in Great Britain. Next. This was 1985, January. A Boeing 737 on final approach to Manchester Airport was buzzed by an elongated triangular or wedge-shaped object. Let's have a look at the next slide. It terrified the pilots, so they took cover. Fortunately, there was no collision. The Civil Aviation Authority concluded that this was a genuine unidentified flying object. People have suggested to me, oh, it was a top secret aircraft and so on and so forth. Well, you don't test top secret aircraft on the final approach to a major international airport. Next. Flying triangles, quite common in the UK. This was seen by a journalist about 3 o'clock in the morning in the south coast of Kent, in a fairly remote area. It was also seen over the Home Secretary's house at the time. Next slide. No, not John Howard. This is Michael Howard, then Home Secretary. And this was not quite, well, not quite, can you go back on that slide? And that craft was seen by a number of witnesses hovering over the vicinity of Michael Howard's house. And there was a security alert. Michael Howard, of course, denies having seen anything at all. And it took me over a year to get a response from him. It was, I think, a one-sentence response that he had and he remains to have absolutely no knowledge about the object at all. Next. This was one of the extraordinary series of objects seen over several nights in Phoenix in March of 1997. Extraordinary drawing of this chevron, huge chevron-shaped object, which went right over the several witnesses, making strange rumbling sounds and having other bizarre effects. Next, please. Chinese Air Force MiG-19 or JJ-6 interceptor fighter was sent to chase a UFO, 1998, in Changzhou. And the pilot got within range of this craft and he requested permission to fire at the object. Permission was denied by ground control. We're learning. Next. January 2004, on the final approach to Dublin Airport, 8 o'clock at night, Boeing 737, this precise plane, was harassed by a flying triangle, very similar in shape to that one we've just seen earlier. It caused the outside air temperature to be raised to 164 degrees Celsius, caused turbulence, it damaged the wings, it damaged the air brakes, and fortunately the plane made a safe landing. This was observed by the pilot of a British Midland Airbus flying 5 miles behind in the landing circuit. 2 hours later, a similar incident happened, but as far as I know, there was no damage to this particular aircraft. I don't know the details of that one, but that was reported. So a number of pilots witnessed these things, and they were sworn to silence, apparently. Officially, everything is denied, but it was very disturbing, and there have been other disturbing incidents reported by pilots in 2005, quite an alarming one. So it's no wonder that the authorities are reluctant to acknowledge the reality of these things. It's very disturbing. I mean, it's bad enough with a terrorist threat flying, for God's sake, to start telling people they're going to be harassed by flying saucers and triangles and so forth. Next. Top secret. This is, I'm sure you've seen this, is part of a 21-page above top secret affidavit giving the reasons why the NSA is withholding information on news. That's just one page. It gives some reasons, but mostly it's blacked out. But I'm going to show you that they have actually declassified something. What do we mean by above top secret? My first book was titled that, and later beyond top secret. Is this not a contradiction in terms? Like military intelligence, some of you might say. Let me explain. Top secret. Thousands of people have top secret clearance. It's the highest clearance per se. Top secret means information, the unauthorized disclosure of which can reasonably be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. I always look around the room at that point to see if you can. Anyway, that's fine. But when things get really sensitive, you need to reduce the amount of people who know about that particular situation, who have what's called a need to know, or NTK. And they then, if they have a need to know, they are briefed in what's called a SCIF, an SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, sworn, threatened, whatever, and they will be, let me show them, let's have a look at the next slide. Here we have an example. At last, the NSA, they declassified. I've known, a number of us have known, Stanton Fried and others, the actual classification was top secret umber. That was the compartment, okay? So there we are, there you have it. And interestingly, more information has been released by the NSA now, but this is a 1980 document, they're still not releasing everything. So it just shows how seriously they take these things. And it's quite reasonable. They say, well, we can't release methods and sources. Methods, you know, like how many embassies they were bugging to get information in Washington about UFOs. And of course, the names of sources, that's absolutely crucial. Next. Another few minutes, just a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen. This extraordinary letter is from a friend of mine, not to me, it was sent to a former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the United States, and a former CIA agent, Carl Flock, who's actually written 2 books on UFOs, which are very good, except that, you know, no aliens were involved, of course. It's very interesting, just sharpen that up a little bit. I've recently become troubled and interested. This is by someone attached to a certain Senate committee, probably armed services, but it says, I've recently become troubled and interested in the mounting series of reports and indications of unreported or unidentified airborne vehicles. I'd be very interested in discussing these matters with individuals who you believe may shed light on the nature and or origin of such technologies and the history and nature of any relationships that have been developed between entities of the United States government or other organizations with such phenomena. So there you are. Next. No information was for. I helped that gentleman. I put him in touch with various individuals, but he never actually got any reply from Carl Flock. Gorbachev, relating to the 1985 Geneva Summit, stating, the United States President said that if the Earth faced an invasion by extraterrestrials, the United States and the Soviet Union would join forces to repel such an invasion. I shall not dispute the hypothesis, though I think it's early yet to worry about such an intrusion. Well, certainly from that time, there's information in my book from various generals that, in fact, because of the problem, for example, of these things buzzing and landing at intercontinental ballistic missile sites, and in one case, actually setting off a launch sequence of an ICBM in the Ukraine in 1982, Americans and Russians have been in contact, sharing information about what is seen as a UFO threat from some of these species. And Reagan, towards the next slide please, Reagan towards the end of a very important speech before the United Nations, I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask, is not an alien force already among us? Well, he quickly went on to say, what could be more alien to our universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? But I think he was trying to tell us something. Why do I say that? Because on 2 occasions, he'd seen UFOs, one as governor of California in the governor's plane when he ordered the pilot to chase a UFO. And there was a Wall Street Journal pilot on board, and Reagan got all excited and disclosed his long-term interest in the subject, forgetting there was a journalist there. And that's how the story came out. But, you know, people have said to me, you know, well, Reagan was an actor, come on, you know, that's not very, 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 very convincing. What I would say is, well, first of all, Reagan was in the political world a great deal longer than in acting. And secondly, all politicians are actors. So, just about finally, extraordinary statement was made at the Toronto Disclosure Project conference in Toronto just about a year ago. This is Paul Hellyer, on the right there, former Canadian Minister of Defense in the Trudeau regime, 63 to 67. UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. The classification was, from the outset, above top secret. So the vast majority of US officials and politicians, let alone a mere allied Minister of Defense, were never in the loop. The time has come to lift the veil of secrecy and let the truth emerge, so there can be a real and informed debate about one of the most important problems facing our planet today. Next, please. Well, this is our planet. It's the only one we've got at the moment. Is there a threat? Well, I have learned, and Hellyer has learned, that at least American officials perceive a serious threat, and one or two other governments perceive some UFOs as posing a serious threat to this planet. Others are millions of years ahead of us in terms of spiritual, ethical, whatever development you care. But there are some, apparently, according to my information, that pose a threat, and this is the principal reason behind the secrecy, because also we have to consider that, you know, if there is liaison, which I'm convinced there is, between not just the United States government, maybe a few other governments as well, between ETs, perhaps developing technology, and according to my information and others, we have developed very sophisticated technology which is being used already to counter that threat, and may be used increasingly in the future, together with Russian collaboration and so forth. That is obviously of consideration, especially if we're not running the show, as somebody put it. You know, are these guys determining how much we need to know? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Just one final word. Whatever threat is posed by some extraterrestrial species, I remain convinced that we have a great deal more to fear from ourselves. Thank you very much.